Just before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to quickly share something that might interest you, especially if today's conversation has got you thinking about your own sustainability work. Some of the things we hear most in this industry are, I wish I could connect with other people doing this work, or I'd love to turn my sustainability expertise into something more. Well, 51 to Carbon Zero, the sponsor of this podcast, have created their own referral network. And it does exactly that. This isn't about selling you something, it's actually about helping you make money while building the sustainability community we all need. So here's what's in it for you. First, you get to join a genuine community of sustainability experts who share knowledge, refer work to each other, and solve problems together. So, no more working in isolation. Secondly, there's real money involved. There's 10% plus commission on software referrals. We're talking about projects that go from 30 grand up to 100 grand. Plus, you'll be able to boost your presence by taking part in our fireside chats. I've actually got an email in front of me from Louise Stevens, one of the ambassadors, and it says that all her clients are genuinely happy because she's got a great partner and her clients love them. But here's the bigger picture. You'll be helping accelerate the sustainability transition that we all desperately need. Every referral, every connection, every collaboration moves us closer to the world we're all working towards. If this resonates with you and you want to earn some extra income, click the link in our show notes to become a 51 to Carbon Zero ambassador. Okay, back to the show. Hi, and welcome to Sustainability Solved, the Sustainable Business Podcast. I'm Will Richardson, the founder and CEO of the Green Element Group, incorporating Green Element, Compare Your Footprint, and of course, Sustainability Solved. We've been empowering organisations to manage their environmental impacts for a just and sustainable world since 2004.
And I'm Charlie Luxton, an architectural designer who focuses on sustainable buildings. In this episode, as usual, we're talking about sustainability, but we're venturing into slightly new territory and talking about football. And Niall Cooper from Fair Game is joining us to talk about the problems in the sport, what needs fixing. Welcome, Niall. So, can you tell us a little bit about what the Sustainability Index covers?
Yeah, it covers a whole range of things. It covers things like environmental impact, but also equality standards, financial sustainability, fan and community engagement, all things that are really quite fundamental to how a football club operates. I think a lot of people have this maybe naive idea that it's just about 11 players on a Saturday afternoon, and that's what it's about. But actually, a lot of football clubs are hubs of their community. They represent history and traditions going back a long, long time. But also nowadays, a lot of football clubs will also provide services. So you'll have things like dementia groups or walking football, or you'll have food banks, or you'll have environmental programs, all being run and organised by the local football club. And that's really where, we're very keen to see football moving in that direction. Because when we talk about sustainability in a fair game context, it's more than just the environment. It's about actually sustaining that community and also sustaining the long-term future and history of those clubs that, we believe really are the centre of so many communities up and down the country.
So it's sort of looking at the full wraparound, I suppose, of, the ESG, so the environment, the social and the governance side, and picking up on all of those equally important sort of elements.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And I think where we're at with football is that it just kind of hasn't got into that space enough, hasn't really championed those areas as much as it could be. We've got too much of a risk culture. What that basically means is that to succeed is seen to be, it's all about spending loads of money, like paying loads of stuff on players' wages, and that actually puts the whole future of a club at risk. What we're seeing and have been seeing is increasingly the importance of the wages of your third choice left back being more important than your community program in a lot of clubs. And, that's something that really needs to be addressed. And with Fair Game, we've brought together the clubs that care, if you like, the clubs that actually do think more long term about how football can be that force for good. And it's that voice we're really trying to amplify in the game and trying to get to a culture where football's finances and the financial flow starts rewarding those clubs. And that's the kind of change that we're trying to get. It might sound radical, but it's not. It's all heading in that. There's an opportunity now for it to change with a new football governance bill that's making its way through Parliament, and we're hopeful that can lead to something quite much more sustainable in football.
And what sort of figures do you have in a nutshell? What are you looking at in the main, really?
Every year, the Premier League receives of £3.19 billion in football finances. Most of that will disappear on players' wages. Over 85% of it stays within the Premier League, and not much of it goes down to clubs lower down the pyramid. What we are advocating for is that a new independent regulator will look at how that distribution is set, which is kind of really common in lots of other industries, lots of other regulated areas. You'd have like set parameters about where that money should go and how it should be distributed and what things it should address. Not all the regulators are great, but I'm going to use probably a relatively bad example of Ofwat. But the idea with Ofwat is you have multi-million-pound industry, and the people that really matters about is what happens when you turn the tap on. And the theory of a regulator there is that the customer, the person who turns the tap on, has certain protections. And the same should apply to football, that there are certain protections about your community football club and all of those sort of things and what it should be encouraging. And that's actually not that difficult to implement. So what we're talking about is at the moment, a football club might spend £100,000 on its community program. Now, remember that's in sort of League Two or something, or the National League. At the moment, £3.19 billion is what the Premier League gets. So where that equates in a kind of simple way is for every £1,000 that a club in the Premier League gets, 15 pence goes to a National League South or North club. So that's a club like that might be based in Tunbridge Wells or Chester or Ebbsfleet or places like that. So and there are loads and loads of towns that are like that. They're getting just 15 pence. If you were to say double or treble, or if it goes to what the average attendance would be, which would take it to something like £22.
In 1,000, £22 in 1,000. So 2.2.
£22.
2.2%. That's my maths right there. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So, but that difference, if you imagine in that local community, what is that club providing? What does it do for your, the food banks, the dementia clubs I mentioned, the kind of school programs that all of these clubs do? And you can actually look at ring fencing that money through those parameters about how that's done if you have an effective regulator. That is an absolute game changer in so many communities and towns. And financially, in terms we're all kind of pinching our belts. There's no promise of any new tax rises. There's no kind of likely new significant investment. This actually is potentially new investment that is free from the taxpayer's burden, if you like, and it could make a very significant difference. And actually, that's what is an extra 15 pence to the Premier League for that one club, out of £1,000. It's such a minuscule amount, but actually has such a significant impact on those local communities where those clubs operate.
And one supposes then that if you apply that across the board to all of the Premiership clubs proportionately, you effectively just slightly reduce the pay capacity for top rates players or players in general and say, well, we can divert a little bit of this money down the food chain to grow the grassroots and to really help communities. It's sort of is it a sort of stealth tax on some level or more of a sort of I suppose it is, isn't it? It's a redistribution of wealth strategy.
It is a bit of that, but it's about short-termism versus long-termism. So, what actually, if you are, and also thinking outside the box, if you are a multi-billionaire and all you're caring about is your own club, then the Premier League's attitude is fine because it actually makes you richer. But if you're thinking about the health of football in the country and you're thinking about actually making football clubs a hub of a community that provides a service and gets people, if you're running community programs, if you're running those school programs and those food banks and the dementia clubs and environmental programs out of a football club, people will have a more affinity, and we've seen that for our research, to
Really?
that football club. They want to be there, they want to come in, they'll feel that kind of connection. And also, if you look at extra money towards football academies and coaching programs, what you have is more talent. So you have a stronger base, you have more talent coming through. Remember that the current England team, bar one or two, have all come through from lower league clubs originally. So you have this greater talent pool, you have this greater community connection, and a greater community connection actually probably means more people coming through the door, more people buying the merchandise and so on. So you have a much more stronger
Right.
base that actually benefits football overall. But it takes an holistic oversight of people to say, right, actually, this is what's better for the game overall rather than my individual club.
True.
And one of the problems we have in football at the moment is that people that run the game are people who are only interested about their own individual club, not about the wider sustainability of football and the communities they operate within. That's the bit that we need to look at breaking. And with this football governance bill that's going through Parliament, that is a potential to do that. And that's why I think we need to be looking towards, if we're really going to change the way football operates and make it more sustainable and make sure that it actually strengthens communities. And that's I think a really positive potential direction of travel. And we'd hope, that the new government takes that on board.
It's using sustainability as a whole, isn't it? And actually, I can see this firsthand with AFC Wimbledon and the community and the way that that football team resonates with the whole of that community. I'm from Wimbledon and my mum is not a football fan at all. But I tell you what, she loves AFC Wimbledon because they do the food banks, because they do so much that you've just talked about. And I think that that's really powerful, because one of my questions was, well, why is, that's great having these great things to do, but what's in it for football? But you've just described exactly what it is in for football. It really does get people thinking about football who possibly wouldn't even have thought about football in the first place.
Exactly that. That's because it is more than just the match.
Yeah,
It's more than just the 11 players or whatever that squad is. It's about that kind of connection and that affinity. And it is realizing that football can be a force for good, can actually help shape and bring those communities together and offer something, a connection,
brilliant.
that is one of the big things behind sustainability. I admit, Will, I didn't know your mum was an AFC Wimbledon fan. I mean, I was on the board of AFC Wimbledon for a
Oh,
while,
were
so I'm
you?
quite happy to hear all of that.
And my brother was one of the people that put money into AFC Wimbledon as well.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, we're all volunteers at AFC Wimbledon at that level. I was a directly elected fan onto the board, so um, you know, it's a real. We did quite an active thing about trying to be that kind of community club.
Right.
And the clubs that have joined Fair Game are ones that have got that same sort of ethos.
Yeah.
We've all been a bit frustrated because football in a lot of places didn't have that ethos, and the clubs that were picking up the phone and complaining about it were just one club. The voice was small, and what the key was to bring those like-minded clubs together to say, actually, there is an alternative future for football. There is something that is richer and better. I mean, for those AFC Wimbledon fans, the results have been pretty shocking. Last season was an exception, but they're pretty shocking for 5 years. But the club's actually grown in terms of its community reach and its
Yeah.
sustainability because that's the active way they've done. And it means that over time, the club is much more healthier because of the approach that we've taken. And that is being replicated in other places. Like another club would be like Lincoln City, who've seen slow growth, but they've got massive commitment towards their community and their outreach and their sustainable approach. It's those clubs that don't think short term, that think long term, that can thrive. And what I think we need to be moving towards is that financial flow rewarding the clubs that take that approach, because that's where you will see culture change.
So, who is currently regulating football? And who are you seeking to effectively usurp through the football governance bill?
So that's really interesting. So if you looked at who controls football rather than governs football, that's the kind of connection, because the governance of football should be the FA, but the actual purse strings, and it is one of those, you have to follow the money of who's controlling football. It's the Premier League. The Premier League are the ones who fund a whole range of things, but the most of the money from the FA comes through from the Premier League's participation in the FA Cup. The Professional Football Association is majority funded by the Premier League. The League Managers Association, majority funded by the Premier League. To kick it out, who are a great organisation, majority funded by the Premier League. The Football Support Association, majority funded by the Premier League. So all of these things are all the voices of potential criticism are funded by the Premier League. And obviously, the Premier League sole is a business that has its stakeholders are 20 billionaires. That's who runs the Premier League, whose sole interest is in the growth and the income generation for the 20 clubs of the Premier League. That's their remit. They do a fantastic job. If you looked at their business model about making more money for rich billionaires, they're great at it, but they're the ones who control the game. So then, naturally, as a billionaire owner of a Premier League football club, why would you particularly care about what's happening at Carlisle or Ebbsfleet or Tunbridge Angels or Darlington or Gateshead or Lincoln or whatever? It's not really of your interest. Why would that matter? What matters is whether you can get a player with like more money that they earn in a week than us three might earn in a lifetime.
And how do you see the current bill? I mean, what does it set out, and how does it change that structure?
See, the bill is almost there, but it needs slight improvements. And I think we've seen quite a good noise coming from the political parties about trying to improve it. So the bill has a section. I could bore you with the clauses. I've read it far too many times, and I won't. But
Thanks,
there's
man.
a section in there that, I could, question me, say what's on page 36, whatever. It's part 6 for those of you who are
Thanks, man. I'm making a note. I'm noting this down. Yeah.
Part 6, clause 58
yes,
is the one
got
you really
it.
want to look
58.
at.
Yep.
Right. So in there is that talks about backstop powers. What that is if a financial distribution, because it's the Premier League organises the financial distribution down the rest of the pyramid, that has to be approved. You have a deal, and the Premier League put forward a deal, and the other body involved, which in this case would be the English Football League, and they have to kind of agree. And if they can't come to agreement, then the independent regulator can say, "Oh, well, you need to think about these things." And then if they still can't agree, then eventually the independent regulator can say, "Well, we'll pick that deal or that deal." So out of those, which sounds okay, except that when you're looking at the voting structure of those two organisations, that's a bit flawed, and it actually doesn't look at the wider ecosystem of football beyond the lower reach of the EFL and certainly the National League and the lower league and all the rest of it, and doesn't really address some of the issues we're talking about here. What we're suggesting is basically a change in the order of how that process works. So the first thing that a distribution deal needs to do is consider what we would call parameters about what is acceptable within football. So that's like, is this club financially sustainable? Is it investing in community engagement? Is it investing in equality standards? Has it got an environmental issues? And the clubs that have scored well are the ones that should get a larger slice of that pie. Obviously, there's still a divisional weighting, but that starts to encourage clubs to spend responsibly. At the moment, there is no encouragement for a club to spend responsibility. In fact, completely opposite. The encouragement is to try and overspend so you can make this big jump, and there is a huge jump between divisions financially to get to that next level. And the only way you're going to progress up the pyramid is to massively overspend and hope that you succeed. And if you don't, then frankly, you go bust. Club goes to administration. Loads of local businesses go out of business, they go bankrupt, which we've seen 64 times since the turn of the century. So it's really quite common.
What this? Whoa! This century in the last 24
Yes.
years, 64 clubs have gone bust in the last 24 years.
Gone into administration.
Gone into administration.
Right. So they don't go bust. The club name still exists, but what you see is all the local suppliers who are owed money by that club basically getting either nothing or 1p in the pound, which is basically...
How many clubs are there roughly that, the 64 gone bust out of how many?
That would be out of 92.
What?
Wow. That's
92
a huge
clubs.
percentage.
Remember, though, that there are some clubs that have gone into administration multiple times. So it's not like...
okay.
I think in that period, Portsmouth may have gone into administration 3 times in that period or something like that.
But we're still talking about over 50% failures, like structural failures, well over 50% at the time. I mean, that is a business that desperately needs some sort of regulation, right? I mean...
Yeah, totally. I mean, let me add on to that. There's a phrase called technical insolvency. So that's when, a club is actually losing money hand over foot. 58% of clubs in the top 4 divisions are technically insolvent. That means if their owner was to walk away tomorrow, turn off the financial tap, that club would be bust. They only survive because there is a benefactor pumping money into that club. And that benefactor is basically pumping money into that club because they're trying to look to see where they can jump up to that next financial level. So they're gambling. And what they're gambling with is they're gambling with the history and traditions of that club, but they're also gambling with the livelihood of all of those suppliers who help that club.
Okay. So moving back to the ESG kind of conversation, and we were talking about players being paid, equal pay between women and male. I'd also like to talk about what Dale Vince has been doing with regards to his club and the environmental impact of what they have achieved and how that plays into what it is that you're doing, or does it not?
So, yeah, it's interesting on both of those. So let's pick up with Dale. Dale's been behind something called the Green Code, which is a really good positive step within football. Where Fair Game would want to take the Green Code is to the point that becomes part of the sustainability index, which we want to adapt and strengthen the index. Obviously, that's just come out, so it's about constant improvement. But the idea of that is you're rating all the clubs on a whole criteria, and then on that football financial distribution, the clubs that score highly on that index are the ones that get more money. So where we would take Dale's concept is it's not just about a kite mark, it's about a financial reward as well. Because if you start rewarding financially football clubs, then you will start seeing them going, you'll have the chief financial officer of that club going like, oh, if we start taking these environmental measures and these social impact measures and these community measures, it actually leads to more financial resource for the club. And that's where we think you will see that change. I mean, it's one of the great conversations I had with DCMS is say, if you want culture change tomorrow, reward it.
So just Dale Vince is the founder of Ecotricity, isn't he? And he bought Forest Green Rovers, am I correct? And has got a very ambitious plan
that's it,
for the stadium, for transport,
Rovers.
and for green energy and food and all of that kind of stuff, hasn't he?
Their whole football team are vegan as well, and he's proved that they are able to perform at a very high level as vegans as well. And I think that's it. And I think because it's holistic, isn't it? We need to be looking at absolutely everything. And so is he behind the sustainability index?
He's behind the Green Code. He's not. We've had conversations with Forest Green Rovers. I'm going to make Dale sound a little bit not quite as brilliant as we all might like. Is that Dale sees himself as a trailblazer, and it's very much his baby.
Yeah.
So, it's about, for us, we're about collaboration. So we would love Dale to come on board and endorse the Fair Game Index and to really help us embed the Green Code within it. And that's where we're at. Dale hasn't quite gotten to that space yet, but
Well, if he cares about football, he probably will, because it makes sense to actually work together as a football, in unity.
Exactly. So Will or Charlie, if you've got a hotline to Dale and you want to, everybody else who's listening, certainly that hand is certainly out there. We'd really love to work with people that want to make football force for good, and Dale's in that space.
He is one of my heroes. Just before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to quickly share something that might interest you, especially if today's conversation has got you thinking about your own sustainability work. Some of the things we hear most in this industry are, I wish I could connect with other people doing this work, or I'd love to turn my sustainability expertise into something more. Well, Green Element, the sponsor of this podcast, have created their own ambassador network. And it does exactly that. This isn't about selling you something, it's actually about helping you make money while building the sustainability community we all need. So, here's what's in it for you. First, you get to join a genuine community of sustainability experts who share knowledge, refer work to each other, and solve problems together, so no more working in isolation. Secondly, there's real money involved. There's a 10% commission on software referrals and 5% on consultancy work. We're talking about projects that go from £1,000 right up to 100 grand. Plus, you'll be able to boost your presence by taking part in our fireside chats. I've actually got an email in front of me from Louise Stevens, one of the ambassadors, and it says that all her clients are genuinely happy because she's got a great partner and her clients love them. But here's the bigger picture. You'll be helping accelerate the sustainability transition that we desperately need. Every referral, every connection, every collaboration moves us closer to the world we're all working towards. If this resonates with you and you want to earn some extra income, click the link in our show notes to apply to become a Green Element ambassador. Okay, back to the show.
And what about changes that are so the governance thing? I completely see, and I suspect your sort of strategy is that if we get the governance right, everything will flow from that, the social, and then hopefully we get to the environmental. I mean, do we have a handle on the impacts of football environmentally? I mean, as a pastime, do we understand quite how much carbon is produced from football attendances? What are we doing to try and challenge that and tackle that? Is that in the agenda at all yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to. So we're seeing stuff about scope 1 and scope 2. There's scope 2 and scope 3, sorry, that's happening. So there is kind of the right direction of travel that's going on. But it's just, we're really like step 1 of a marathon. So, there is the right noises being made. We have got quite a number of environmental measures in the Fair Game Index for that exact reason, and we see it as twofold. I mean, one, it's morally and environmentally sensible and responsible about where football needs to go, and the fact that we have a lot of teams that have been taking short haul flights, going right. Oh well, I'm flying from Manchester to London, therefore I'll fly when there's a perfectly reasonable train service that can do it, and it's probably quicker. Those sort of things shouldn't be happening. The kind of stuff where you look at where is your local getting your food from a local sources rather than shipping it in from miles and miles away. There's loads of stuff like that that can be addressed, and we're starting to see clubs beginning to think like that. And this goes back to that kind of whole incentive about where you could get with the index. The other thing that we want to do with the Fair Game Index is actually say to those organisations that are ethically minded to say, right, well, come and talk to us. We can tell you, we can match your values to the Fair Game Index and tell you which clubs you should be looking to invest in. Because if we can get ethical investment into football, then again, that's going to start seeing that culture change that I think we all need to see. And we have that kind of now quite detailed analysis that will tell you who are the good clubs and who are the bad clubs, and it's that culture change that we need to see really get over the line. Football is unfortunately run by an awful lot of people that are, look a bit like me, which is kind of early 50s grey hair, now nearly white to be fair, who kind of have come from a different kind of world where there's kind of they aren't that as engaged as in the future as they have been, and we need to kind of break that and move towards a situation where people are thinking more responsibly. Not to say white 50-year-old blokes don't think responsibly. I'm just saying that there's a generation gap that still needs to be an education that still needs to happen.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm interested. Could you, without sort of wishing to name and shame, could you give us an example of a club that is at the very bottom of the index and a club that's at the very top, and maybe give us a narrative as to what they're doing to be in those positions? Is that something you're allowed to do, or is that a bit unfair? I don't really know.
I mean, whether it's unfair or not. I mean,
That's what the index is about, isn't it? I mean, I think that...
Well, I hope so, yeah.
Most of the clubs towards the bottom are the ones that you would look at are financial risk takers. So if you were looking, you wouldn't take you difficult to pick up the back pages of a paper and go, right, well, no surprise, the clubs like Nottingham Forest who have overspent a lot on players' wages, and I think we were looking at their reserves. Remembering your financial reserves are supposed to be, in business senses, 3 to 6 months is kind of considered to be the right amount you should have financial reserves.
Yeah.
Our last analysis was Nottingham Forest had something like 5 hours worth of reserves. So you kind of go, obviously not very sustainable. On the flip side, clubs like Lincoln and Carlisle were doing very well because they scored really well on equality and diversity and environmental measures, where they're really taking that in a very proactive stance. And that's where you're seeing, and they are financially sustainable as well, because they're looking holistically about how to run a football club and with that longer term view. So it's the people who think short term, which are more likely to be at the bottom, and people who think longer term, who are more likely to be at the top of the index. And what we need to do is get more people to be thinking long term about that sustainability and their role they have in a community than the short term gambler.
We heard a while ago about Thornby FC, which is a club in Stockton-on-Tees, which axed the entire women's side because of financial problems. Is this what happens in clubs?
Yeah, exactly. So you're looking at when you've got, this is the whole left back scenario, right? I want to sign a left back and pay him a certain amount of money, right? But to do that, I've got to make cuts elsewhere. And the priorities become the left back over the women's team.
Yeah.
And until you have a situation where football says actually having encouraging women's football, encouraging environmental thinking, encouraging things that run all those sort of support groups that I talked about, then they're going to be cut. It's the easiest thing to cut on a short-term basis. Your backroom staff and your kind of support stuff if you want to sign your third choice left back.
And it goes back to what you said right at the beginning about how you look after the grassroots and you actually look after everything around you there, then actually you get the momentum all the way through. And I would hazard a guess there's a lot of women in Stockton-on-Tees that are a bit like, who cares about football? Because they don't care about us.
Exactly. So in that situation, does that club become a hub of its community or does it not longer term?
Yeah.
You'd be going, right. Yeah. You'll be going there with a bit disgruntled. It's the casual fan. It's the person who wants to have that connection is going to be like, well, I'm put off. I don't feel part of that community or that club.
Particularly as the demographic of the younger generations are looking at purpose-driven. When they're purchasing stuff, they are looking at B Corps. They're looking at purpose-driven businesses. They're actually thinking about what it is they're buying or procuring. So therefore, they will be thinking about what they're watching at the same time. So this is a cultural change that will come through.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to remember is that a lot of clubs live hand to mouth, so they're really, they're really struggling just for their day-to-day existence, and actually having the ability to think about all these things is actually really quite difficult for them. And I think this is the space that Fair Game has moved into. Is we see ourselves as that 12th player that the clubs haven't got the time to do that. We'll do the thinking, we'll do the analysis. Fair Game begins by clubs saying these are the problems in the game. How do you fix it? What do you do? And we take that problem and try and solve it and come out with realistic solutions, which is where the index comes through from in the first place. And it's that bit that we try and give that bit so they can strengthen and make the right choices. Because if you're working 60, 70 hours a week, which a lot of the people who are in the smaller clubs are doing, and some of them on a volunteer basis, then thinking holistically about the benefits of the game is actually quite, it's not top of their agenda.
So are you also hoping or expecting that as you identify good actors within the space, that you will be able to lead sponsors to align their agendas with good actors and to sort of, create a virtuous circle in that element, as well as having from a sort of a more sort of central control sort of area?
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely what we want to do. I'll go back to my example of AFC Wimbledon. My experience there is that that adds so much more to the wider financial system. On the AFC Wimbledon, there were numerous times we were looking to get new loans into the club to help us build a new ground, a new stadium, pay off some of the debts, and you go through the whole process. And financially, we're really secure. We had a very good business model. Most independent financial analysis was saying we were fine. And you get to the last question, it'd be, "Are you a football club?" And you go, "Yes." And they go, "Well, we're not lending you any money." Um, and that's because the people who are investing in football right now are often your gamblers or your kind of people who are looking at that short termism. So if you can start getting more ethical investment, and football is seen as more of a safer and securer place, and a place that's got ticks all those boxes that you're talking about, actually you can potentially get more investment into the game for the right reasons. And that's one of the things I think a lot of ethical companies would be like, well, why do I want to associate myself with football? Because there are loads of other things that would be considered to be unethical that are happening within the game. And you need to look at how you change that, because there are plenty of people now that have got businesses with really strong CSR or ESG policies that could be looking at football, but be thinking of something else because of football's tainted reputation. And until that changes, then it's going to be a struggle.
And do you think the big clubs see that? Do you think they understand the potential to sort of open up to new funding streams, or is that counter to their sort of vested interests?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of both, isn't it? So you will have clubs that will be, number one in a lot of the big clubs is the financial benefit of the big club. Where they get their money from doesn't necessarily matter for most of the big clubs. What they could see is if the direction of travel within football's investment was actually, if you start investing in the right things, then you're going to get more money, whether it's through government legislation or whether it's through a growing ethical investment attitude globally. That's when they'll start doing it. They won't do it unless there's a financial benefit. And that's where you need to have somebody outside of the vested interests of the game to be directing those kind of conversations or pushing it, whether it's a wider societal movement, which there is going on, as we both touched on, or whether it's more direct government legislation with saying these are the parameters you need to do.
Sure.
That's what needs to happen to see those changes. Very few of the top clubs are going to be leading that agenda.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because although we're talking about football, we kind of could be talking about business full stop, and we could be thinking about other businesses with, thinking about the same kind of things. And I'm now thinking about Salford Football Club, and because they're quite unique with the fact they're owned by Ryan Giggs, David Beckham, and so they've got a different. And how do they fit in with what they're doing? Just out of curiosity, because they are footballers inside that care obviously passionately about football.
So yeah, no, the issue slightly with Salford is what would happen to Salford City if Ryan Giggs and David Beckham got bored with Salford City?
Well, this is I actually don't know because I don't know enough about it, but I can see from an outsider that it's a unique kind of proposition that's going on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's similar with Wrexham, that if the people who are pumping money into those two clubs were to walk away, both of those clubs would be financially unsustainable tomorrow.
Interesting. Okay.
So, but you touched on something, Will. You said it sounds to me like you're trying to set up a kind of virtual circle that we're trying to set up in all businesses, and all sports, one assumes, where you reward virtuous behavior. Do you have an example outside of football that you're looking to try and sort of bring the best learnings from? Because, in many ways, if you can solve this in football, man, like maybe we can solve it in loads of different areas, and we're really onto something here.
So I think B Corp is a really interesting example. So, what you've seen with B Corp is you've started to see businesses working together and sharing that kind of ethos, and the kind of more ethical consumer going, right, well, I'm going to choose a B Corp because I know what a B Corp means. And so, there are one or two football clubs that are pursuing B Corp status. I mean, everyone went down that route, stalled a little bit because there's an awful lot of paperwork to become a B Corp. And Grimsby Town, another club that are going down that route. So, what you'd be looking at is that kind of the virtuous circle, virtuous group of going, right, well, actually, the B Corp should be, if they were thinking about who they would want to invest and sponsor, then Fair Game as an organisation, we're those kind of clubs that have the very similar ethos. So are those that group of people that can come together to try and actually support each other and develop things, because the more powerful that group becomes, the more likely you are to see change in that wider area. So it's bringing those people together. That's where I think the power of the B Corp movement is growing, right? So the more kudos to that, the more you can see an overlap with groups like Fair Game or people that are back in the Green Code or whatever. And that's where you build that group in and that kind of momentum. Fair Game only exists because clubs that were thinking the same sort of way came together and actually started making a noise, and we started influencing politicians and we were getting doors open, because all of those clubs were never getting any influence or very little influence when they were just on their own.
Could we touch on Fair Game for a second? Because I don't know a great deal. I mean, who are you? When was it formed? Because it seems to me you're trying to take on an incredibly large business. There's an enormous amount of ambition in what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so I'll go for the Fair Game story quickly. So the Fair Game story is, I am an AFC Women in Fan. We mentioned it, and I've been on the board a couple of times. The second time I came onto the board, my manifesto was, well, what can AFC Women? And for those who don't know what AFC Women was, AFC Women is a club that was created when the owners decided to move the club 60 miles away, and we said, no, we're not having that. We're going to set up our own club in the community that we were still existing. So that's how AFC Wimbledon came about. Then fast forward 20 years, I was going, right, well, how can AFC Wimbledon take our kind of community ethos and use that, influence the wider world of football? I was also a previous sports journalist, so I spoke to loads of contacts within other boards and in football clubs, and it came back and said the governance of football is broken and we need to look at how we're fixing it. And there are supporters groups that already exist, but what hadn't ever existed was the clubs coming together and saying, well, actually, we want to make a difference. We want to champion good governance and equality standards and community engagement and fan engagement and environmental measures and so on. So I began to bring those clubs together, and those clubs grew from being one club to 3 to 5 to 10 and now 34 men's professional football clubs who are all of that same ethos, and they empower Fair Game as an entirely volunteer organisation of now 80 people who go out and lobby and campaign and develop policies. And how we operate is that we have the problems presented to us by the clubs, and we work with universities to develop realistic solutions to those problems, put position papers out, do the kind of lobbying and all the rest of it that you'd expect from a lobbying organisation to try and change policy and try and change the way football operates. And that's basically how our model works. And it's run by a lot of passionate people who believe football can be a force for good.
Fantastic. Wow. That's a story. So you're completely volunteer.
Yeah.
You're a volunteer.
I am a volunteer, yeah. We are looking to move towards being a paid organisation. So there's obviously a fundraising element to what we're trying to do. And, working with those kind of moral clubs and speaking to kind of B Corps and so on, that's where we really keen to get money in to help us become ourselves more sustainable, because passion takes you a certain way, and we wouldn't have 80 active volunteers. And those are quite skilled volunteers. So people who are, political lobbyists in their day job, or national journalists, or whatever, or people who've been head of HR in kind of big organizations. All those sort of people are all connected. So we're always interested in having talent come in, and our big thing is always about constant improvement. So, but yeah, yes, I'm a volunteer. Yes, I'm dedicated to it. But I'm a passionate football fan who believes that we can do something quite amazing with our national game.
Are all? I mean, 34. You mentioned 34 clubs. Why aren't all the clubs members? What do you think is a barrier to membership? Why do you think this is not completely embraced by all of them?
I think there's two things. One of which is that there is an element of short termism. There's an element about actually there are people that overspend and are quite happy to be overspending. That don't quite like the gambling culture within football and want to do that. And there is an element of clubs that live a little bit in the dark ages that still goes on. And it also, a lot of clubs just haven't got the brain space, the capacity to think about all of these bigger issues because there's so much going on just to survive day to day.
Of course. I mean, if you've got 5 hours of time left, then you're absolutely only going to be thinking about the 5 hours left. You'll carry on doing what you're doing because you've always done it, and that makes complete sense. It'd be very hard to change that mentality as well.
Exactly that. So this is the whole bit about reward culture.
Yeah.
So if you start rewarding football clubs to be better than my God, tomorrow you'll find them crafting out more than 5 hours a week or whatever to do that. Or, that 5 hours will become, right, well, here's how we can do that. This is what we need to be doing because it's actually financially beneficial. And I think over time, if we did that, then it would become the norm, the normal practice to be kind of ethical and sustainable. But you need to start somewhere and you need to get people thinking in a different way. And that's the first hurdle. And that's where I think the kind of incentive approach is the key before you can get it institutionalized within our game.
Funny enough, I'm thinking of even just mental health. What you are proposing would be so much less stressful. Can you imagine being in a position where you are constantly having to make sure that you keep the lights on and it's a massive battle? That's stressful. That's not sustainable from a well-being point of view.
Exactly that. I mean, I talk about my time on the board. So we spent a lot of time trying to make sure all those questions were addressed and dealt with. And then at the same time, you've got a team that's losing on the pitch. So like you can be putting all that effort in and your fan base are going, right, well, you're responsible for, actually, I wasn't responsible for picking the team, but people thought I was responsible for like picking the team. And you get all that extra pressure as well. So, you're actually trying to do the right thing and yet your team could be losing and that you get grief for that. So it is a very stressful place to be in, which is kind of where the advantage of being fair game is because we're kind of removed from the results element side of it, that we can kind of help people concentrate on doing the right thing.
When do you think the football governance bill will be passed? When are we actually going to see these wonderful ambition come to life?
So it really depends on whether it makes the King's speech or not in the first session, because it was very close. It failed when the general election was called. So it had already begun the committee stages. So literally, it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks away from making legislation. That's how close we were. And it wasn't perfect, and we would have definitely wanted amendments to it. What we're hoping is that in the King's speech that it's included. And if it is included, that it isn't the previous version, but it's an improved iteration of that version. And if that happens, then we could technically seeing a governance bill past, end of this year even. And that would be a really good. I mean, there is already a shadow regulator operating. There is a department that's operating within the civil service that is looking at all of these things. There are roles that have been hired. But it needs to have that little bit extra to kind of go there. And that's about making sure it's in that King's speech. It is, we lobby really hard. And it was in, it was in the Labour, the Tory and the Lib Dem manifestos. So, for having it in. So there is a commitment. We just need to make sure that commitment comes soon.
I have to say there is something refreshing and energizing about the ambition, of what you're doing. And the fact that 80 volunteers are taking on a multi-billion-pound industry and that you feel that empowered enough and confident enough that you're actually going to make a difference. And I think for that, enormous respect for all of you putting the time in and doing the hard work. It's really
absolutely.
inspiring.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I mean, that's I think my mantra is, we're here to try and make the world a better place. If this is a little step that I can do, then it's great. And there's nothing more motivating for me than taking on a couple of multi-billionaires.
I think you're in the right time, right place. I mean, look at the Better Business Act. It's of a similar type that what you're doing. So you've got things going through Parliament now that is all about this. So this is going to happen. This is going to succeed, isn't it?
Well, fingers massively crossed. It takes the political will for it to happen and for politicians to be brave enough to take on those multi-billionaires and go, right, let's do something that's good for all those communities where all those clubs are.
And I think what's fantastic about the index is that it's putting it in black and white. It's giving it data points. And, data points are very clear, and they're very hard to argue against. And I think increasingly with all of these issues, it is data that is going to drive these changes. And so the fact that, you're focusing on that, you're getting this stuff out in the daylight, I think it makes it very hard to ignore.
No, exactly that.
So carry on, and hopefully you will revolutionize football to become the driving force of good in the heart of communities across the country. Well, thank you very much, Niall. And that's it for this episode of Sustainability Solved. Next month, we're going to be talking about the supply chain and a new kind of trackable pallet. Make sure you hit follow in your app so you get notified as soon as that episode drops.
And for questions and more information on sponsorship opportunities, email podcast@sustainabilitysolved.org. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please do leave us a review in the podcast app. It is really, really appreciated.
Thanks for listening. I'm Charlie Luxton.
And I'm Will Richardson. So you really enjoy sustainability and want to be a part of the solution? Come and join our vibrant community now. Book a call and we can talk more.